So welcome to the class of behavioral game theory, although the title is different, but it's just, some first introduction to my class. And, teaching PhD students is my second favorite things after drinking a glass of Barolo or bottle of Barolo with friends. So, I'm very happy about having you today. And so let me just, first of all, advertise the new lab, the Behave lab, which has been established, well, now something like 2 years ago. And the lab does not fully exist yet, but we are very close to have the lab in Milan. So we are just working on the equipment and the software, but after the pandemic, I assume that we will have a lab to perform experimental research in Milano. And the idea of Behave is to be a center for research and training in behavioral sociology. I will explain what is this. And however, our idea about behavioral sociology does not only mean behavioral experiments with humans or individuals, either in the lab, online, or in the field, but it's also the idea to try to integrate experimental research with computational research. So to try to expand a little bit the experimental observation we might have in the lab or in the field with computer simulation helping us to, perform a little bit of scenario analysis to improve or, solve some of the problems or limitations of experimental research in terms of size of observation, size of interaction, complex social structures of interaction, which are a little bit difficult to reproduce into a lab. And so the idea of Behave is merging, integrating computational research, especially agent-based modeling and experimental research. So the idea is that there's a lot of benefits from integrating these two methods in general. And to provide a little bit more nuanced scales of observation about social behavior, which is sometimes limited in experimental research. So if I know that some of you is interested in this kind of combination, so I love this thing. So, this is really something that I love to do. If you see here, you find the Twitter account of Behave, and there's also a Facebook group. So if you want to stay tuned, especially in this pandemic periods, times in which we are a little bit despondent, probably not very much well connected. So follow us on Twitter or on Facebook or see the website and you will see a little bit what is going on in a Behave. And one of the most, well, I'm very proud of this. One of the most important initiatives of Behave is to run a summer school on agent-based modeling. And you find here a couple of pics, 2 pics of some previous class of the behavioral behavior school. And this is an intensive course from 1 week to 1 versus 2 weeks also to learn how to build agent-based modeling. And this year we will have an online version in spring, in April, very close to announce this. And then hopefully if the pandemic will evaporate at some point from our life, we will have the usual edition of the Behave summer school, which is 2 weeks, 1 introductory and the second advanced, typically in Brescia, in a beautiful Lucchini Collegio in Brescia, then where we stay together. But this depends on the pandemic, okay? So stay tuned. Surely, this kind of class, this kind of school is offered to any one of you as part of the training of the PhD program. In case you are not interested, you can easily, drop out from the school. No problem at all. I don't want to, impose you something that you are not interested in case. Okay. So very well. What is going on here? Which are the key points of this lecture? So key points is, well, provide you a little bit of background, but not so much, in the sense that we will spend a lot of lectures during the course in behavioral game theory on reflecting about theory in general. But I would like to just to give you a little bit of, references, and just to tell you what is this. And in my understanding, any sociologist interested in using behavioral methods for his or her research is at some point ends up mixing different types of things. And the type of things that I mix are behavior game theory as a theoretical inspirations, especially because I'm very much interested in studying cooperation and social norms, how much individuals interact, and which is the role of social norms to create favorable conditions for cooperation of individuals in different contexts. Behavioral sciences, which is a very broad now umbrella label or terms, again, mixing different types of things, including experimental economics, and well, the old school classics of social psychology, which is, you know very well that, especially in the US, the boundaries between social psychology and sociology are very, very, so these two fields are very, very close. And all this kind of mix of things are used to understand social behavior. So not to understand individuals or individual behavior in themselves, but to understand how much individual behavior in an interaction context generates collective patterns and dynamics that we are interested to examine and understand. So this is just a little bit of I mean, this is my cocktail. So everyone has a kind of intellectual cocktail. This is mine. And but today I will especially concentrate on the second key point, which is showing you examples of behavioral research. And I picked up some examples that, well, in my opinion, well represent the variety of different kind of applications of behavioral research in sociology. So I will give you a couple of examples about laboratory experiments in the lab. I will give you a couple of examples of lab in the field. So whenever experimental research is brought to the field, so your researchers are not welcoming typically students or subjects in their own kind of lab, like they invited. So it's not experimenters inviting students for dinner, but are subjects inviting experimenters for dinner. So are researchers going outside in the field and try to use, with all the problems and advantages, try to use experimental design in the lab instead of traditional observation, which often is used by social scientists in the field. And finally, online experiments, which are now obviously extremely pop. Well, because everyone is online now, and especially during the pandemic, and online experiments has a lot of advantages today. And I will give an example of a paper that I'm just yesterday ended up revising for a journal, in which we ran an online experiments in the making, so during the pandemic. So I will give you a little bit of details about this design, which is still not published, but hopefully it will be soon, because I like it very much to, run these experiments during the pandemic online. And then, even if I will not concentrate specifically on this third point, I will also give an example of, researchers using lab evidence, or in any case, experimental findings to inform an agent-based model. This is my key point, so I prefer not to insist on this today, which is requires a little bit of effort, but this is the main point, especially of the behavior game theory, in which I will discuss with you a couple of examples of agent-based modeling calibrated with experimental data. So I tell this a little bit, every sociologist has this kind of, is fascinated by labels. So I call this augmented sociology. So, this is totally cool. It's not only Pierre Bourdieu who is entitled to create fascinating labels. So even Squazzoni create fascinating argumental sociology. I like it a lot. I'm joking here, but as a way to push a little bit of, keep, push experimental research at the next level. That's my point about using agent-based modeling. So this is what I'm more or less plan to do today. Well, I hope you like that. So you are in a restaurant, there's a fixed menu and you can't escape from it, but that's it. Okay, so, today, if you speak about experiments in general, what people believe, okay, experiments is things for economists, well, and especially psychologists, but no one probably links that the idea of experiments to our discipline. And so it's, and this is true. I mean, there's a few sociologists probably compared to others doing qualitative research or traditional quantitative research. That's, the club of experimentalists in our discipline is not the biggest one, and you probably know that. You are in this kind of five students, that at least 2 of them are planning to do experiment. So this group is biased. too many experimentalists. That's not. It does not represent you. We are not representing. You are not sampling the population in this. But anyway, so I know that I will also probably, if you like, discuss why it seems to me that youngest researchers are a little bit more interested in this kind of research anyway. But this is not true. I mean, this is false. Because there is a venerable tradition in our discipline about using behavioral methods for doing sociological research. And I always use this example that one of the first papers ever published in using proposing the public good games, which is one of the n number of frameworks for experimental research on social behavior, has been published in one of the top journals in sociology in the first 70s. And if you go back even more, you find examples of sociologists who were using and reflecting also using experimental design in sociological research since from the 30s of the last century. And I mention here, for instance, Stuart Chatton, but many others. So we sociologists, together with psychologists, were running experiments and reflecting about using experiments before economists were even, realizing what is an experiment in itself. I pick it up here some examples of this kind of literature. You see, Chapin was 1917, The Experimental Method and Sociology, published in the Scientific Monthly in 1917. So more than 1 century ago, and still insisting on this also in the 30s, as you see from this journal article on the Journal of Educational Sociology. And this is one of my favorite, this kind of book that I have here, Behavioral Sociology, Experimental Analysis of Social Process, just over there in my private library there. And it's one of my favorite kind of book. So then, very well, for those of you who knows a little bit this kind of history of our discipline, then from the 70s, from the 50s and the 70s, there has been a domination of social systems theory, Tucker Parsons kind of stuff. There's been a lot of functionalism in our discipline. So a lot of things happened, but in any case, for those of you, so if you at some point will, as everyone needs to, justify yourself or, feeling that you are, on the shoulder of some giants, or in any case, there's a tradition. These are the typical references that you might use to say, guys, I'm not crazy in doing experiments in my discipline. It's just that you forgot that there is a tradition. And also, by the way, now, this kind of new trends about analytical sociology, or after James Kahneman's foundation of social theory in the 1990, there has been a lot of people, valuing this kind of behavioral research in our discipline. So things are changing and so on. But anyway, just to give you an idea. So I love this kind of, for instance, this kind of paper publishing in 1978 in the American Sociology by two American guys, in which they were reflecting about why using experiments or how to improve connections between social psychology and sociology. They were just mentioning this kind of idea of the fact that experiments could help us understanding, the aggregation of individual behavior in the social dynamics that we want to understand at the macroscopic level. So it was a way to, explaining this kind of, not just describing social patterns of dynamics, but also try to explain them in terms of individual behavior, and not in terms of correlation between aggregates or effect of one aggregate on another one, but in terms of going down, as James Coleman later will tell about, going down to the macroscopic level and understanding generating mechanism of social outcomes. This is another favorite stuff, still the American Sociology a few years later, the previous one by Linda Malm, who has been one of the most, who contributed the most in making proselytism about experiments in our discipline. And she was, telling about this kind of things, that we are not interested in understanding individual behavior. We're interested in understanding interactions between individuals. And experimental designs are very good to try to keep under control a lot of confounding factors and manipulating conditions to understand. Whatever reaction of people to manipulated conditions can help us to understand the emergence of social behavior from individual interaction. So these are just, I don't want to, spend a lot of time in giving, but just to tell you that this is not, something, that only, exists in the mind of some crazy people like me, but there's a tradition. So you're not alone. So that's a very good tradition to rely on in case you're interested to study this kind of the genealogy of experimental research, behavioral research in our discipline. Anyway, this is my favorite example. I don't know if you got it, but already it's my favorite example, and about the power, the beauty of experimental manipulation for understanding group behavior. So, suppose that you are an experimenter and you have a lab which looks like a beautiful kind of building in New York City or in a modern kind of city like this one. So an open plate, full of window, very bright kind of environment. And supposed to have a bunch of people at your disposal that are looking at you like these guys here and waiting for some instruction about what to do. They were just there, and let's suppose that you can tell them what to do. And you have two groups of people in the same. So first, you have this kind of guys on the top left. Then after 1 hour, you have at disposal other guys which do not know this kind of, who don't know this previous one, which are entering for another building, I don't know what. And still, they are just there and waiting for your instruction. And suppose that this kind of first group of people on the top, you give them the instruction to execute a behavior. So they just have to execute a certain action that you tell them to do. Suppose that you're creating incentives for these people to exactly execute what you want they do. So there's nothing else that they can do. So they are there, they are paid for executing what you command them to do. And suppose that this instruction of these people are this one. So guys, you are a branch of people, I don't know how many are, maybe 20 something. So now stop, just take a minute, don't move, don't watch around, don't smile, don't signal each other what you are thinking, just look at each other without smiling, without doing anything. And pick up 2 reference points, so 2 people, 2 individuals in the group that will be your reference points, your mental reference point throughout the experiment. And these are called your A or B. So everyone has to pick up mentally and decide who are the A and B in the group. And don't tell that. Okay, and tell them that whenever they have done this, okay, they have to execute this action to move throughout the space by being at the position, by being outside the ideal line, connecting the A or B in the space. This is the simple rule number one. You are this gentleman. These are your A and B. Whenever they will move, you have to be outside the line connecting in the space your A and B. And knowing that everyone has the same kind of instruction and will do the same kind of action. So everyone will have the kind of A and B. So you will be probably the A or B's of someone else. And you will have your A and B's as well. And then let's suppose that you say, guys, press go. And they start to move in the space, you know, follow this kind of simple rule. Let's suppose that the other group have the same information, same context. You only change a little bit this kind of simple rule. Everyone has this kind of A and B, that mental reference. But this, you change a little bit the rule. And instead of being outside the line connecting A and B, now you instruct them to say that move in a space in a way that you will be in the middle between your A and B as a reference point. And you say, go. And obviously, if I ask you what is going on, so what you will be in a top, you know, like and you will observe in this kind of from the bird's eye view, you will observe the movement of this group of people in the space. If I ask you what will going on, so what do you believe is at some point, you know, this kind of group, you will see, you know, a kind of collective behavioral, which will reach some steady state conditions, or you will see this group of people continues to move until you say, oh guys, okay, guys, let's have a coffee, you know, stop here. So like this kind of group of people never reaching any kind of steady state equilibrium or being stopped in a certain position, which is the simple rule between 1 and 2, which ensures you that, or which will generate more probably a steady state equilibrium at the group level. Yes, that's for you. See, number 1, stay outside your line or stay within, between the line of the A and B's. What is your guess? Anyone?
Well, I think that maybe the second rule might create a concentration in the middle. So
okay.
A lot of people.
Okay, so Francesca goes for the rule number 2. Anyone going for the rule number 1? No one betting any money on the rule number 1, okay? Yes? Okay, got it, Francesca, very well. Yes. Oh God, what is going on here? Okay, so, oh yeah. The group number 1 is stay outside the line connecting A and B. Will generate a collective pattern in which these people will oscillate and continuously move in a space without ending up in any kind of steady state equilibrium. So they will adapt to each other. Every movement of a person will affect some other person because that person is an A or B. And this will be a mutual influence between these people. And they will continuously going on in this kind of environment without continuously try to, you know, stay outside and no fixed steady state equilibrium will be ever reached in this kind of group of people. Whereas in the very short step numbers or number of action executed by an individual, the rule number 2 will generate it almost deterministically, you know, a concentration of these people in one portion of the space. Obviously, you can't predict exactly where. So you can't predict that point in the space. They could be on the left, on the right, close to the window, or behind you, whatever. But you can you can be confident in estimating and predicting that this rule will determine a steady state equilibrium with everyone concentrated in a space, in a single. This is easy to understand. Obviously, it's because this is a centripetal force. The rule number 2, and that's probably why Francesco got this kind of guess, because it's a very fundamental law of physics about this kind of centripetal force in which there will be an attraction of everyone in the same, in a same portion of space. And at some point, given the fact that these kind of people can, evaporate their body or jump one onto another one, creating a tower, at some point they will collapse in a physical position and they will concentrate on that. And so this is an idea. I mean, it's very, group of people executing a simple rule without making mistakes. So the rule is very easy and it does not require computational, sophisticated computational requirements in terms of this person. So it's very unlikely that they make some mistake. But the mutual influence, the mutual adjustment and adaptation about each other behavior induced from these two rules determined different kind of aggregate outcomes. And this is one of the examples that we also use in the agent-based modeling community, because there's a very nice NetLago version of this kind of game, which is framed differently in a heroes and cowards. So in a agent-based modeling community, but it's the same kind of thing, And heroes and cowards means that your A and B are friends who have a fight, and either you want to stay in the middle, rule number 2, avoiding that these two friends of yours are killing each other. You are the hero. You stop them killing each other. Or you are a coward and you want to say, okay, guys, kill each other. I don't want to, I've been involved, and this is the rule number 1. So, by the way, very nice things. That same rule can be framed completely different in terms of meaning whenever you change this kind of description of the rule in heroes and cowards kind of things, instead of A and B, your friends fighting, instead of, or two persons fighting, instead of your 2 reference point for your mental process. Nice bite. Anyway, so this is an example, we see on a microscopic scale of a group of people executing a simple behavior, generating 2 different kind of outcomes and different 2 properties in terms of group. One is instability and oscillation, volatility, and dynamic behavior, which never reach any point of fixed point in time. And in another, we have another property at the group level, which is steady state, reaching steady state equilibrium. And obviously, what you can, derive from this kind of simple exercise is that sometimes you can predict what happens at the microscopic scale if you understand, which are the implications of a behavior that individuals execute or implement, or at the microscopic scale, like in the case of these 2 simple rules. Obviously, you are so well gassed and well educated to conclude that in most of the case, in society, individuals are not just executing passively behaviors, and behaviors are not, and even if they execute, rules are not so simple, and they require maybe some computational effort, and maybe sometimes people deviate from instructional rules of behavior, and there's a lot of noise in terms of individual behavior. Yes, of course, but the beauty of experimental research is to concentrate on very abstract kind of situation. So this is an example about sensitivity of microactions to differences in terms of individual behavior. But the secret is that it's that mutual forces, this adaptation of the interaction between the individuals, this is the point. And this is one of my favorite quotations in terms of interaction. It comes from Thomas Schelling, Micromotives and Macro Behavior, one of the book that you have to read at some point in your life, if you did not yet. And in which, this is the point. Whenever people behavior is sensitive to, is adaptive to other behavior of others in a given kind of context, it's very difficult to, extrapolate understand or predict macro properties of these groups by, only observing behaviors. So you need to concentrate on interaction, because if people change their behavior depending on the behavior of others, you have to understand what Schelling called it, the system of interaction. So, which mediates and creates a lot of, intriguing kind of surprises from whenever you have to map the microscopic scale from the macro, vice versa, by the way. And whenever you jump into, so whenever you say that interaction has to be the point here, because the aggregation on individual behavior passes through this kind of interaction effect, is influenced by the interaction effect, jumping to conclusion about individual intentions from the observation of the aggregates, or vice versa, jumping to conclusion about the behavior of aggregates from what one knows or can guess about individual intentions, is a very good recipe for failures. So this is a very nice kind of things about interaction. And by the way, experiments are about interaction, not about individual actions separated, but about interaction. So an aggregation between individual choices or behavior. And I will start before making a break, maybe with the first example about intriguing kind of experiments. And I don't know, this is a little bit of a concept about behavioral game theory or experimental economics in general, but this is one of the frameworks we typically use to study cooperation between individuals. It's called the public goods game. You know what is probably a public goods game, public goods in general, you know the quality of institutions, the quality of the environment, and so on. And we, by the way, you probably have noticed that we are playing public good games in a pandemic in terms of, non-compliance of, young people are have infringed their liberty and freedom, and they have probably a very low risk of being infected to benefit oldest, elderly people in the population, to benefit, the hospital, and so. Typically, we play this kind of public game. I'll give you an example about that. But the definition of public game is that you find a group of individuals who have to decide how many of their private resources to put into a public pot. And the resources that everyone decides to put in a public pot have a kind of multiplier factor. They are multiplied by definition by the experimenter, and with given kind of multipliers. And but knowing that whenever the amount of this kind of resources multiplied in the public pot will be divided equally between all these kind of individuals in a given group, regardless of the fact that anyone has benefited. So even if you don't benefit from the group, you can enjoy this kind of your share in the public good. So each subject also keeps obviously the resources that there's a private account, a public account. If individuals decide not to contribute to the public account, they keep everything of the resources in the private account. So, and they can enjoy even not only their kind of private account resources, but they can even enjoy their share of the public account where others have contributed. Knowing this, typically by backward induction, individuals can decide not to contribute, not exploited by others. And so there's a lot of temptation not to contribute, to exploit others' contribution. And if people know and predict that anyone else will not contribute and will try to exploit a contribution, obviously no one will contribute and the public good will not exist. This is an example that you have here. Obviously, social evolution has developed a lot of different kind of mechanisms to avoid this kind of trap of defections, mutual defection of individuals, or increasing probability of free riding. But you will see, I mean, this kind of mechanism in the behavioral game theory class. But let's just assume that this is a very idealized situation in which there's no punishment, there's no reputation, there's no other things. It's just like that. And well, there's a lot of examples of free riding on the public good, from tax evasion, which is a possible example. You hide your income if you can, and so you keep your income in your private account. You don't declare your income at the tax authority, and you enjoy your income for yourself, but you benefit from hospitals, infrastructure, and public institution, which has been built and maintained and developed thanks to the fact that others have contributed. So we are free riding on the public good. But there's a different kind of examples like public corruption or clientelism or other examples. Also false witness is sometimes viewed as a cheating on the public good games in terms of quality of punishment institutions. And so, and there's a beautiful example, if you have written about Edward Banfield, this American anthropologist who in the 50s visited for a given number of months a community in southern Italy. And he coined, by the way, the famous terms amoral familism. And it is fantastic book, The Moral Basis of a Backward Society, published in 1955, if I remember well. And he basically explained the low quality of public goods in this kind of southern communities by the fact that all the individuals in that village, in that community, were keen to maximize the interest of them and their families against the interest of the community in many these subtle positions and things. So, and he counted these kind of things, that the problem of underdevelopment of the southern Italy was not a problem of lack of infrastructure or lack of public investment or education, but it was a problem of amoral families. And his kind of explanation was dramatically contested, as you might presume, especially from Italian sociologists, who at the time were a little bit Marxist. and so there was a discussions between this kind of, there was also this example, this kind of American guy coming here and explaining us the problem of the underdevelopment of the South, whereas we spend a lot of effort ourselves to understand ourselves. So there's plenty of different things, but the amoral families hypothesis is still around. It's a survivor for this kind of criticism, and it's one of the examples. It was a cheating on the public good games, maximizing the interest of you and your family against the interest of your community. And so this explains corruption, political corruption, or the lack of support of citizens to political party or to trade unions and this kind of stuff. So a lot of examples about this kind of thing. So this is the fundamentals milestone of this kind of public good game. This is a paper published in 2002, so about 20 years ago, by Ernest Fair and Simon Gatcher in Nature. And it's the first things where they added to the public good game a form of punishment. So they say, okay, if people play a sequence of public good games in the lab and they know the end of the game, and without any further conditions, the expectation of defection from others in terms of contribution to the public good will generally condemn people to decrease the quality of the public good. So at some point people will defect and they will keep the resources in a private account and not contribute to the public account. What if there could be a probability that someone could pay an individual cost to punish some free riders at their own kind of expense? If you add this kind of fact that people can also decide to use part of the private account to reduce the wealth of those who did not contribute, what can happen? Can the aggregate level of cooperation increase? Are people inclined to and stimulated to contribute more to the public in view to try to minimize the probability of being punished? And so they had this kind of individuals in the lab. This was run in the University of Zurich, if I remember well, in Switzerland, surely. There was a group of students who played a sequence of public good games, a sequence of decision in which they got the resources and they had to decide whether to keep for themselves or put in the public pot, knowing that each amount put in the public pot was tripled and divided equally between group members, independent, regardless of the level of contribution to the public good. But they added this possibility to intentionally put some kind of resources to punish and reduce the wealth of free riders. So people knew how many people have free rided, and they could punish, they could punish this kind of free riders. This is what we call within group design. So we were told also differences between this in a class in the behavioral game theory. But typically, this is a within in the sense that you say a group of people are instructed, they read the instruction, they know the rules of the game, they pay off, they know everything. So by the way, during experiments, typically individuals know the information is public in a way that people has the same information, and the information includes all these kind of instructions, and there's no there's no cheating or there's on this kind of information. So people have the information, so there's no, and everyone has the same information, and there's no an extra information needed for deciding what to do. And they were play a sequence of public school game with or without punishment. The only variations that this were do is that one group were played before the punishment option and after the without punishment option, or vice versa. This was to understand which is the sequence. If the sequence to play public games without punishment and then adding punishment later gives different result than starting to play a public game with punishment and then suspending punishment later. So they were this kind of, they played it. The A and B mean cooperation level you find here in figure 2 reflects this kind of two groups play a different sequence between with or without punishment. And you see that adding punishment obviously increased the average cooperation level in the public pool, even if obviously the costs are individually paid. But people seems that they are keen to subtract, to reduce their wealth, to punish someone who didn't contribute, even if this kind of punishment benefits everyone. Also, those one who did not did not subtract resources to punish someone else. So punishment adds a little bit of double meta cooperation game. On the one hand, someone has to decide to use part of his or her resources to punish a free rider. But on the other end, people deciding to this kind of costly punishment option for themselves are reducing their individual wealth to, yes, reduce the wealth of free rider, but the benefit will go to the whole group, even also to those one who did not decide to punish. So adding punishment is adding a double layer of problem of cooperation. At some point, if you realize that you are in a group of people playing such a game, and you are the only one bearing the cost of punishing someone else, at some point you stop even bearing the cost of punishing someone else if you are the only one, subtracting wealth for yourself to punish someone else to benefit the whole group. So there's a meta dilemma of cooperation that punishment introduces. But this is an example of very nice kind of paper about adding punishment. And why I say this is called altruistic punishment, in a way that you punish a wrongdoer at your own expense to benefit the whole group. It's also called strong reciprocity, by the way. It does have two different kind of concepts that more or less are the same thing. But I use this example, by the way, in the behavioral game theory, I will give an example of a couple of papers at least one paper that of authors who use it, the same sample of this kind of experiment to study the network effect. So what is the effect of, in terms of decision of cooperation, what is the effect of being grouped with some people and more or less cooperative? I didn't mention here that obviously the precondition for making cooperation difficult to achieve is that people change always groups. So if you play the public game in a sequence of n number of rounds with the same persons, it's likely that you establish full cooperation. Maybe only the problem, you have the end effect whenever the rounds of the games are known by people and they play with the same group of people over time. It's very easy, also without punishment, that people can, approximate a full cooperation in a group. However, still, you observe also a decline of the average cooperation as soon as the game approximates the end. This is called the end effect. Because at some point in the last round, it's more probable that people cheat on each other. So there's no future kind of interaction. And in the last round, okay, guys, I've been a good guy so far, but now I will cheat everyone. I not contribute to the public good, and I will keep the other's contribution for me, my share, and I will not contribute. Obviously, knowing this, people start to anticipate and reduce their level of effort in rounds approximating the end. This is called the end effect. So it's like an effect which propagates, it's nice, it propagates back in time from the last round. So, which is why, I mean, people should, in perspective, in the rational choice, you know, economist kind of view of rationality, at some point, if you know that at the end of the game, you have 10 rounds, and you know that in the 10th round, people will cheat probably. And so you start, okay, why not anticipating and start to cheating myself at the 9th? Well, but why if also others are anticipating the end effect of the 10th round, and we start to defect at the 9th round, so I will start to defect at the 8th round. Well, but if everyone will, at some point, by Behavioural induction, people start to defect at the first round. This is typically what an economist believes people have to do in order to avoid to be cheated by someone else. We don't observe this, but anyway, something like that, and we observe this end effect. But the condition of this experiment is that groups were reshuffled every round. So a person were playing with a group of n number of other members, and then groups were reshuffled, which made even more costly the option of punishment, because you reduce yourself, you know, your wealth to punish someone else who probably will not be your member of the group in the next round. If you know that this will be, if groups are fixed, okay, it's very likely that people will cooperate because you punish exactly a member of your group. And this punishment will change probably the behavior of the next round. And so typically this enforces cooperation. But what happens if groups' boundaries are malleable and people are playing with unknown others in different kind of groups over time? This is what in this kind of games is studied. But I tell this to give an example, then we make a break, that a couple of scholars, Sam Bowles and Herbert Geddes, who all define, so these guys are really the behavioral scientists, so because they're doing experiments and modeling. These are very, Samuel Bowles and Herbert Geddes are very, very important figures in this kind of mix of experiments and agency modeling. What they do is say, okay, we know very well that strong reciprocity of altruistic punishment can establish cooperation, even if though it's fragile, because I mean groups' boundaries are a little bit, you know, blurry. However, they were, you know, they were informed by the case of the hunter-gatherer society groups. You know very well that we spend 90% of our life as humans living in such a hunter-gatherer small group society. You know that 90% of social evolution, humans have stayed or lived in small groups, hunter-gatherer society before the invention of the agriculture. And so where, you know, typically they were living in a small, relatively small groups, and they were competing for obviously locate their kind of community or village close to a natural resource, like a forest where there was animals or wild plants. And they were, you know, catching animals or wild plants. They still, there was no agriculture, no way to grow up. There was a resource dependency from the environment. 90% of our history has been spent on this kind of social organization. And still you find traces of this kind of hunter-gatherer small group societies. This gentleman here, Pygmy, is, for instance, there's still some traces of this kind of hunter-gatherer society in many places around the world also today. And they will say, okay, what was the problem of the hunter-gatherers? It was a problem to solve the cooperation problem, the public games about the effort played by especially men in this kind of division of labor in this society to, you know, catch wild beasts or wild plants for the whole village. So the idea is that there was a lot of temptations for someone to free ride on this kind of effort and to enjoy, you know, his or her lunch or dinner or part of the beast or the wild animals as any others. And so there was a problem of monitoring shirkers or free riders and punished them. And they ran this kind of models about, say, what happens? So which are the more critical kind of behaviors to try to establish or to make possible these kind of groups will not disband and will survive in a hostile environment under competition between groups? And they ran a simulation assuming a population of a number of individuals with size of the groups which were calibrated according to research on hunter-gatherer society, who were playing a repeated public good game, and they assumed three types of behavior. So individuals could cooperate, so put a lot of effort to try to catch the wild animal or to catch the resource. They could jerk, so I mean, given that these kind of people were hunting around the forest, you know, assume yourself to be one of these kind of people, and there were a lot of people try to hunt the best, and you are just close behind the trees, sleeping without putting effort. And then at some point, someone catch this kind of animal, and okay, let's go back and distribute the resource to anyone. And there was the probability that, or a possibility that individuals could pay a costly option to, you know, reduce their wealth, to catch, to monitor, and to punish these kind of shirkers. There was a probability of being caught, so, and the probability was also depending on the number of resources that strong reciprocators were willing to put to try to punish wrongdoers. So everyone, there was three types of behavior. So cooperation, where people who cooperated and so put a lot of effort in a public game without, you know, independent, regardless of what others were doing. This is called unconditional cooperators. So people who cooperate independent from what others do. And there were, I mean, shirkers who were estimating the probability of being caught, estimating the size of punishment, and deciding rationally how to put in a public good, how to tune the effort depending on the probability of being caught and the amount of punishment. And there were cooperators who were conditionally, so they cooperated obviously, but they also were willing to pay a cost to punish these kind of shirkers. And what was the punishment? The punishment was the typical punishment that in hunter-gatherer society were used: ostracism. So those who were caught not contributing were typically isolated from the group. They were just isolated there. They were not enjoying, obviously, their kind of food for a given number of days, and they were just excusing themselves, and they were readmitted to the group. And it was obviously a fitness loss from this kind of people. So because they could not eat, and typically they were isolated, they could not reproduce themselves, for instance, and so on. So there's a fitness loss in terms of a probability of having offsprings and so on. There was a given group size, which were more or less calibrated or informed by the group size of the hunter-gatherer societies. So there were villages with different kind of groups, depending typically on sexual and offsprings and sexual match between men and women. There was a given immigration and immigration rate, so people could move from one group to another one to mimic exactly sexual encounter between individuals of different kind of groups. And there was also a probability of sexual encounters between members of different kind of villages to mimic, you know, random encounter in the forest. And there was a probability of disbandment. I know that this sounds a little bit crude to contemporary kind of reflection, but this was the life of hunter-gatherer societies. And there was a probability of intergenerational transmission of behavioral traits from parents to offsprings, who were inheriting the wealth, but also propensity to behave like a cooperator, to behave like a free riders, or to behave like a strong reciprocator. And there was ideally a pool of isolated agents that could be joined in the model. These are the typical fictional things that you do in the model, because in the model, typically you can, you know, have a lot of things about random stuff. But just to tell you, this is a very nice kind of paper. And what they have found here is that if you end up in speaking about long-term evolution, which is something that the models can help experimental research in doing, what is the probability of a group from the initial condition to survive over time with this, in this kind of conditions? Is it the rate of cooperators into the group? Is the rate of reciprocator, those one punishing? What is that? They, I mean, observed that the group fitness, or the probability of group to increase the members to increase their resources and to survive, and over time to intergenerational transmission of behavioral traits. And the frequency of cooperators were negatively correlated. So the more cooperators in the group, the less probability that the groups evolved and resisted and persisted. Because the higher the number of cooperators, the higher opportunities for selfish to exploit cooperators. What was instrumental for the survival of the groups were the number of reciprocators. So the higher the number of reciprocators, and the higher the probability that selfish were spot, and so they were punished, and they could change their behavior and turning into cooperators. So the higher survival probability with at least 1 out of the 3 reciprocator. So you see here in this kind of graph, so the coexistence of these behaviors is instrumental to the evolution of the groups. You know that this is counterintuitive. Everyone would like to kill selfish. But, you know, the presence of selfish, in case there are reciprocators who are willing to pay the cost for punishment, are keeping reciprocators alive in the population. And so these avoided cooperators are unilaterally exploited by selfish. At some point, if there's no reciprocator, at some point, the temptation of exploitation from rational individuals who are tuning their contribution depending on the probability of Bayes becomes dominant, and so cooperators are exploited and the groups is disbanded. So this is a very nice kind of things about the role of strong reciprocity or altruistic punishment to keep, to increase the probability of survival of groups. And I like this example, not only because it's a model which is informed by, uses an experimental kind of framework and has in mind a real condition like the hunter-gatherer societies. I like this because in this way, you see that we are concentrated on some group properties, probability of survival, higher survival probability for groups, group fitness. So we are no more zooming on individual behavior. We are observing and estimating group properties, which are exactly what sociologists are expected to do, which is understanding group level behavior, not individual one. So we will go back to this kind of example during the behavioral classroom, but I like this kind of examples of combination because it seems to me it's very difficult, you know, with experimental design to capture this kind of, for instance, evolutionary processes. You have just a fixed number of observation on individual behavior. You can't keep, you know, individuals play your experiment for 20 years. It's impossible. So you just have, you know, a microscopic observation scale. Probably you capture something, but you need to scale up your observation scales to the macro picture of evolution to try to, you know, probably understand better this kind of implication of individual behavior for group level dynamics. So guys, so welcome back, guys. So, and we ended up in a previous lot in understanding, providing an example about a combination of lab and modeling, and on the very important topic about studying how to enforce cooperation via reciprocity. And here another example where it's not game theory. So you remember this kind of cocktail? The cocktail does not involve any game theory. The cocktail now involves a little bit of social psychology. And it is an example of online experiment, which has been, well, not replicated, but which also has inspired a lab in the field example. So now we have an online experiment and a variant which has been a lab in the field experiment. It's about social influence, how much our behavior is subject to social influence. And, you know, social influence is, whenever you speak about social influence, okay, now social psychologists knock the door and enter in the room, you know? It's a typical topic of social psychologists. And social influence is, a number of different ways in which we change our behavior to adapt to other expectations or in general to the demands of our social environment. And mechanisms through which social influence exercise or imprint its footprints on individual behavior can be conformity, peer pressure, status. These are the mechanisms through which social influence instantiates our behavior. We are sensitive to other expectations because we value the advantage of conformism. Well, this is, again, I don't want to push on this social evolution analogy, but again, 90% of our history as humans spent in small group society in which we observe each other's behavior. And we were punished and monitored by others. We were monitoring each other and punishing each other in terms of strong reciprocity. So we value conformity, we value the advantage of developing standards of behavior in a group to consolidate cooperation and mutual benefit. Peer pressure is a very similar kind of thing. Status, reputation, all these kind of mechanisms are, examples of social influence pressures. And we see this social influence pressures in a variety of contexts, from markets to, from markets to fads, from corporate communication to public opinions and political opinions. It's very kind of variety of examples. However, the examples today will be about consumption of cultural products. And I will refer to a very famous experiments by Matthew Salganik, sociologist at Princeton, who created online, one of the first, at least, one of the most impressive in terms of size of the experimental sample. He created during his PhD, and by the way, this paper was eventually published in Science in 2006. And what was the problem about Matthew Salganik about his musical lab experiment? The question is, understanding the property of certain kind of markets. So, markets for cultural products like movies, songs, or books tend to exhibit a very kind of persistent property, which is due to the winner takes all kind of structure. So it seems there's a high concentration of consumers buying similar products. So there's if you plot the distribution of sellings and market shares of products in this kind of cultural industry, you find typically a fat tail distribution in which there's a sharp products getting disproportional share of the market. So the famous bestseller kind of market. This is the winner takes all example of market in which consumption is concentrated on a few products. This is an example. You see the rank of movies and which is, this is for books, for movies in general, which is quite puzzling in a way, in the sense that, okay, probably, what is the problem? That everyone has the same tastes, everyone has the same, preferences. What drives this kind of mechanism of concentration of big market share in a small number of products? And this is a puzzle, which is the force behind this kind of patterns or property. And secondly, if you are a producer in such a kind of market, how can you predict which will be the next bestseller? And so how do you, what can help us to predict and estimate, and so allocate budget to try to increase your probability that you are investing in a project which ends up like Avatar getting millions of dollars of revenues. And any data we do have about the producers show that there's a high risk kind of thing. So it seems that even producers of those products are estimating, so I have problem in estimating which is the next bestseller, and sometimes we waste money. So there's a lot of, examples in Hollywood, for instance, about, big kind of companies wasting a lot of money and investing and putting budget in productions that end up in a failure on kind of market. So this is the idea. And probably social influence is a candidate hypothesis to explain why these kind of markets have this kind of properties. And by the way, difficult to predict. So you have a concentration of market share in a short product, but at the same time, it's difficult to predict exactly which will be that kind of best-selling product. Otherwise, everyone will start to produce that kind of bestsellers, and so why producers are wasting money, and because it's difficult to predict, which is the problem behind this kind of prediction. And this is a nice chapter, by the way. I suggest if you are interested in this type of research about Matthew Salgani and Duncan Watts, including the Oxford Handbook of Analytical Sociology, they have a very nice chapter summarizing the examples of research about social influence, and especially in cultural markets. So what is why these markets are unpredictable? And well, first of all, we have plenty of options, plenty of books, plenty of movies. So there's a lot of offer. And whenever we face a market in which there's a lot of options, and we are sensitive to information, obviously, and probably we are also sensitive to the fact that if objects or products which has been already successful, which has been already picked up by a lot of customers, probably, I mean, we will consider them in the sense that probably if a lot of people consume or buy those products, probably there must be something in them, that must be some quality. So the others' behavior is a predictor of the quality of the product. So previous decisions are a signal. And what is the problem here, obviously, is that you learn about how to predict the quality of the product via observational learning, via social learning, via other, the information about others kind of decision. There's still, as you will see, a lot of other kind of things you will see, but basically this could be an hypothesis. So previous behavior of others is part of our observational social learning about our needs for predicting the quality of the product. So, so we are sensitive to others in terms of whenever quality has to be estimated in advance. And so we need some evaluation. And there's uncertainty about our preferences, uncertainty about the quality of the product, and there's unpredictability about our user's experience or consumption experience. So we are sensitive to what others are doing. As you will see, we are also sensitive, as you will see later, because we speak about those products. Those products are not only consumptions like pasta or whatever, but also we signal ourselves to our peers because we consume those kind of products. Those kind of products are part of our relationship and our status. There's also other kind of extra, but we will see them later. Let's assume that we are sensitive to others' decision as a proxy of the quality of a product. So this is the fantastic experiments by Matthew Salgani about, he created this kind of music lab and online before iTunes. So it was something, I don't remember, it was something that the first 20s of 2000 something when he ran this kind of experiment. And he developed a web platform called Music Lab. And he started to advertise this kind of music lab in a population of teenagers in the United States. And whenever these kind of teenagers agree on registering in this kind of music lab, they were, participants of this kind of experiments. And participants of this experiment were put in randomized in two conditions. A condition in which they were asked to listen a given number of songs, which were pre-selected as being not popular, and were 48 songs. They were listening part of these kind of songs. They were asked to rate numerically these kind of songs, and they were given a chance to download a given number of songs, this was the reward. They could download a given number of songs they were previously listened. And so they end up having these kind of songs downloaded in their kind of computer, and this was the reward. This was the independent condition. Group of people, teenager, male, female, and so on, doing this. A randomized group of other teenagers were exposed to a different kind of condition, which was called a social influence condition. They were, you know, again, listen and give a number of songs. They were asked to rate these songs, but before deciding which ones to download, they got information about previous downloads from the independent groups. And so they were, you know, comparing themselves with this kind of group. Given the size of the sample, you know, if I remember well, participants were 14,000. It's one of the biggest scales for the time about, you know, remember that this kind of experimental samples in the lab are some hundreds. Squazzoni got some thousands, so 40,000 participants. So it was very, very big and large scale. You might assume that in the independent condition, when participants were listening, rating, download songs, you can estimate intrinsic quality of songs because these were revealing the individual preferences of a large size of individuals. So you might assume that probably the list of downloads can express, you know, some intrinsic quality of those kind of songs. Whereas in the social influence condition, what was to measure if information of previous downloads from others could, you know, generate different kind of equilibrium of songs in terms of the distribution of the independent condition. So the idea was to understand if information of previous downloads was making the final ranking of downloads unpredictable in terms of different compared to the independent condition. And obviously you might question, why should we care about others' downloads when we got the chance to listen and rate? So we have our own preferences. So we got these kind of songs, and so we might be not biased by knowing others' downloads, and we might decide for ourselves about which kind of songs we want to download. Consider these kind of participants were just mediating online, so it was not, they could not talk about the downloads. They were not friends, so they could not exhibit this kind of downloads with others. There were not this kind of status implications about, oh guys, did you buy, I mean, did you download that song? I downloaded the song as well. Yeah, let's party together. So it was an online experiment. So there was no this kind of status implications. And so the hypothesis was that in principle, if we were rational and consistent about our preferences, we should not find significant differences between this kind of, the distribution of downloads in an independent condition and the one on the social influence condition. But you might guess that if I introduced this experiment, it's because this was not true, obviously. And this is the, so when Squazzoni designed this experiment, obviously the most important thing was to try to understand which were the possible sources of bias in this kind of, in establishing the relationship between social influence conditions, so knowing this kind of information and then deciding what to download. And which is, okay, you might assume what could be a kind of bias. These are the typical things that experimenters have to control. Well, let's suppose that all the women were randomized, were playing the independent condition, and all men were playing the social influence conditions. In case we found any kind of a causal relationship between the manipulation and the effect, we should not be true that, or sure that this is not confounded by the gender distribution of the population. So typically what we do is to have a gender randomized to gender so that we are sure that men and women at the same proportion in all the different kind of conditions. So this typically also age and education, but this is not the problem here. This was a teenager population. So what is the other? The means through which subjects got information about previous downloads. And these are the two kind of experiment 1 and 2 condition in the social influence. Do you believe that in case subjects were receiving information of previous downloads in a ranking, like in this experiment number 2, in which The highest were the top downloaded songs. So this is the top downloaded song, second top downloaded song, and so on until the end of the 84 songs. Typically, this could prime the top downloaded songs more frequently to the attentions of the participants. At some point, these participants were just concentrating maybe on the top, but never scrolling down and knowing which were the last downloaded songs. So the way you present this in the ranking might induce that this kind of ranking is a ranking of value. And so they also randomize a group in a social influence condition in which instead of a ranking on top downloads, information about previous downloads was provided in a grid. Yeah. In a grid in which there was a random distribution of songs per download in the information. So this was to control whether having a ranking increased the signal of the social influence to the perception of individual. These are the typical aspects that whenever you design an experiment, you need to be sure that you are not confounding your estimated causal relationship by information. And we know very well that individuals are sensitive to the information. For instance, ranking triggers typically a perception of a ranking of value. And so this was why they decided to provide information in a grid as well. Examples of this kind of way of presenting information to avoid any kind of bias. And yes, what Squazzoni found is that there was some inequality of the final distribution of the downloads depending on the independent versus social influence conditions. You find here what he called 8 words. 8 words was that there was this kind of differences in terms of how information was presented in terms of downloads, but given the size of the population, they could, match this kind of downloads and the social influence condition in different kind of groups. So there was these parallel groups of hundreds of thousands of people in the same condition that were studied ideally as independent. Let's see if these kind of 8 groups, which are merged differently with these kind of social influence conditions, were ending up with different kind of distribution of downloads of the songs, depending on the variation of this kind of combination. At the end of the day, they found that whenever exposed to social influence, it was very difficult to predict the final ranking in the social influence condition. And there was in any case a difference between the ranking between independent and and the social influence condition. And they used the Gini coefficient to understand this kind of distribution in the rankings. So they found that, yes, if a song has an intrinsic quality which is higher than the others, is high the probability that that kind of songs end up in the top positions also in the social influence conditions. So that's an intrinsic, so success sometimes is a proxy of the quality. So top songs in an independent condition were more probable to end up in a top of the distribution also in the social influence conditions, but for the most of the cases, there were high probability of ending up of songs in the top position in the social influence condition, which were not in the top position in the independent condition. That's a distortion on this kind of distribution of songs. And this must be due to the effect of the knowing this kind of previous downloads, because this was the only difference between these kind of 2 conditions. And so this make, in principle, even knowing the distribution of the independent condition difficult to predict in this kind of different kind of groups under the social influence condition, which was the final ranking. There was a margin of unpredictability, which was due to the combination of information from independent groups and informations about the social influence group and the way information was presented. So this just to tell you that, what is the point here? The point is that a certain characteristics of the market, so predictability of success, correlation between qualities of success, are biased by social influence pressures. And so the guess was that probably is the social influence, it's not individual preferences, it's the social influence processes which makes, these kind of producers, that makes hard for this kind of producer to predict what will be the next bestseller. And so to, probably explains why they also invest in successful kind of products. And so there's an intrinsic process of social influence which has determining the difficulty to predict the final distribution in terms of products. Even in a condition in which, again, there's no status implication, so there's no signal. So and obviously if there's a signal, even probably the guess is that it's even more. If the product is not only, you don't know only the previous downloads, you use this kind of previous downloads from others as a predictor of the quality. And so even if you can estimate yourself the quality, you are sensitive to this. Maybe I'm wrong, and so on. And in any case, there's a bias, there's a stress about your kind of individual preferences. If then the type of product that you decided to get is also an object of social conversation or social relation with others, this can even multiply this kind of problem about lack of predictability of this kind of market. If you talk about books or songs, and if the fact that you got this kind of downloads, and let's suppose that we are the conditions, that the experiment is the same. And so people are deciding about this kind of downloads, and they have these downloads. But you assume that they are randomized to meet in an online event in which they are assumed to discuss about those songs. If you add these conditions, that this kind of downloads is also linked to a social event in which you have to speak or share about this kind of downloads, this can probably make this kind of well-educated guess even more a convergence, because I mean, at some point, if you have to talk with others about the songs that you download, you want to be sure that you download the songs about which anyone else is interested to talk. And so if the consumption is a signal to others, this is also probably increases, you know, the unpredictability of these kind of things, and probably also the pressure that social influence poses to others. So this is an example, you know, this is an online experiment. Obviously, the scale reached by Squazzoni was impossible in the lab, and it was very, very, very nice. And I would like just to tell you that we were inspired by this kind of experience, and we decided to run a lab in the field experiments on social influence in Brescia years ago, still unpublished. Was a PhD student of mine years ago, in which we set up very similar kind of framework like, or design like the Squazzoni's ones. So there was a list of songs, and the only difference in our experiment was that people could not download songs. People were paid for rating. So we got a list of songs randomized to subjects, and subjects were asked to rate those songs, and then we were paid and remunerated for this kind of ratings. And the difference is that instead of having the number of downloads from others, like in the Squazzoni, our social influence condition, they knew the ratings, the fictitious ratings of others, in the sense that we use deception in a way that instead of providing ratings from the independent condition to others before asking them to rate a given songs, subjects were induced to believe that those kind of ratings were from others, but we use deception in a way that we provide ratings which were completely disassociated with the quality. So we randomize the rating, and this helps us to also offer to share ratings which were extreme, okay? So there were songs which people were assuming that others had rated from 0 to 10, 1, or for 0 to 10, 9, which is almost statistically very improbable in real life, because if you have a bunch of people rating from 0 to 10 a song, the probability that a song is rated 1 or 0 or 9 and 10 is very unlikely, because you only need just one rating or evaluating this kind of, and typically you don't find this kind of extreme. So we wanted to disentangle quality from ratings, okay, so that we solve the problem of Squazzoni to have this kind of intrinsic quality from the independent condition. And also we wanted to understand if people were more sensitive to extreme ratings in negative or positive in their influence about their own kind of ratings. And we performed the experiments in the lab with a population of students, and then we replicated the same kind of experimental framework. You see the picture here in a mall in Brescia with adults, so with non-students, and we compare the distribution between students and non-students population, and this is called a lab in the field, because in the field we reproduced you know, the experimental design. And by the way, we also reproduced the same condition of the lab. You see here, the people were separated and hearing this, listen to the song and rating them separate as in the lab. But the only things that were, people say real people, not students, as the students were not real, but they were adults. And furthermore, our hypothesis was that we wanted to control if status was a predictor of the sensitivity towards social influence. So our hypothesis was that let's also have information about the status of students and adults. Status was expressed like in this kind of table, was expressed in terms of occupational status scales. For students, we use their parents as a proxy of an estimation of the status of the student. And for the adults in the commercial mall, we use their own kind of occupational status scale. So we asked them about this. We also asked a lot of different information, but this was the idea. So our hypothesis was high status people, high status subjects should be less, you know, sensitive to social influence pressure from indiscriminate source. In the sense that at some point, you know, others have rated that song 9. You have listened to the song and you have to rate that song yourself. And you know that others have, you know, rated 9 or 2 or whatever. You don't have any information about what these others are. This is indiscriminate in terms of, you don't know if people of your same status have rated that song 9, or people of a completely different status than yours have rated 9 or 2. It was indiscriminate. So we speculate about the fact that high status people should not care about the social influence pressure from indiscriminate source. They could be probably more sensitive to their own same status kind of information. And by the way, here see the distribution of the population in the field experiments, obviously students, and in the commercial center was adults. And what we found was that, yes, found that even if you bias the ratings and ratings were not realistic, did not reflect any intrinsic quality of songs, you still find that subjects are sensitive to this kind of ratings. So you find that whenever you use the true quality of the song, which is the rating from the independent condition, and you see the fictitious rating that you transform and the actual rating of the subject, you still see that the actual rating of the subject tends to converge more towards the fictitious rating than towards the rating of the independent condition, which should be considered as the intrinsic quality of the song. And this is independent of gender, and this is independent from the status, independent from any kind of control. People were sensitive in a similar way to this kind of indiscriminate source of information. So typically null results about the hypothesis about status mediating this kind of pressure. This is also why we're not still publishing this paper. So here you find high status, low status, and so nice things that it seems to us that there's no very big difference. By the way, you see here the distribution of fictitious rating in the lab and in the field, and you know the distance between the quality of the songs and the rating of the subjects, and you see more or less it's the same kind of distribution on the similar kind of song. So the pressure seems to, you know, people are sensitive to this pressure in equal way. We found not much difference between the lab and the field, which is quite intriguing. The only things that we found, but with a very tiny statistical significance, is that students are a little bit more sensitive to status than adults, which were quite counterintuitive in the sense that, you know, you might assume that adults are are sensitive to their own status in more cogent and salient ways. Whereas, you know, you measure status of students in terms of parents, and this should be a signal which is less strong than the status effect on adults. We found the contrary. It's found that students coming from high status family were a little bit more resistant against social influence pressure. Whereas adults having high status reacted similarly to low status individuals. But again, the difference were not so striking statistically in terms of statistical significance. So again, a replication of the experiment in the lab in the field, which more or less indicated the same kind of finding. Well, these are just And what, by the way, there was this kind of hypothesis, if you are a fan of this kind of stratification of consumption, he said that there's an hypothesis in the literature about the fact that there are different kind of styles of consumptions, and in literature, in sociological literature, they are called univores against the omnivore. So there's subjects can be discriminated in terms of univore and omnivore styles of cultural consumption. Univores means that you know, people are consuming just a given type of product, Hollywood movies, something like that. So and typically this is associated with certain kind of status, socioeconomic status of the subjects. Others tend to consume variety of kind of goods. They like the Hollywood movies, but they also like to go on the Wednesday evening essays movie when they see Iranian or Eastern Europe or Russian kind of movies in original language, which typically disband the couple, but that's another problem. And so this kind of style, you might assume that, you know, if you're a univore, maybe you're more prone to value the social influence pressure, because if the pressure of others, the opinion of others, and the opinion is an average opinion of the population, probably it average more, you know, it reflects more Hollywood than Iranian movie of the Wednesday essay. And so if you like univore, probably you are more sensitive to this kind of information. Whereas if you are an omnivore subject, you consume a lot of different kind of products, you probably are less keen to be subject to the influence of the average opinion of others. Again, this was an hypothesis that we didn't find anything, so we could profile each individual, each subject in terms of more preferably univore and more preferably omnivore, because we also asked the cultural taste to each subject, so we could, you know, clusterize our lab and field population in terms of more univore or more omnivore kind of subjects. And so we estimated in this kind of characteristic of the subject in terms of previous cultural taste could, you know, predict the fact that they were more or less sensitive to the ratings of others, and we didn't find any trace of this kind of hypothesis about this kind of things. Seems that whenever sources are indiscriminate, these kind of signals about status just rule out or are not there. So this is an example, and I would like to tell you about the example that lab in the field is quite good in the sense that one of the criticisms against lab experiments is that typically those experiments involve students, and students are not very well representative of the population. And so we are interested to replicate the same kind of experimental design outside the lab in the field in order to have this kind of mixed population and to compare results with students and non-students population. This is an example about the fact that we didn't find significant differences between this kind of population. But it's always, for those of you who will run maybe some experiments, conscious about the fact that one of the sources of criticism is about the subject pool. So distortion, bias, and non-representative subject pools. Okay, so, and then an example of the online experiments like the organic ones, but run in the making, run during an event. And which also, this is the paper we are working on, is we wanted to estimate the effect of the source of information on lockdown measures on the compliance of subject. And so the willingness of subject to cooperate with non-compliance, and so to infringe, reduce the liberty and freedom and quality of life to benefit older population, and especially to benefit the community in general. And so we ran this experiment during the pandemic in the end of May 2020, and online with O3, an online website and link in which subjects were clicking on the link, and then we were doing this kind of experiment. The experiment was not game theory, was not any kind of thing. It was an interesting mix of survey and behavioral experiments, which is another very important point in terms of the literature. And the experiment was, advertised on Facebook, and Facebook groups, also Facebook in general. And through a system of APA tracing, we were prohibiting to any kind of APA not with people not resident in Lombardy to participate to the experiment. And so experiments include only resident adult in the Lombardy region, which was, as you know very well, were Milanese, and was one of the most areas in the world during the first wave of the pandemic. So this was end of May. In the end of May was a transition period between the first wave of the pandemic, in which our Lombardy was where all the country was under lockdown, and there was announced in June that there were a gradual easing of the lockdown measures, and so the problem was how to enforce, for instance, norms relating to wearing a mask or washing hands, and also in the public and at home, in a case in which you are relaxing, the lockdown. And we know very well how end up this kind of relaxing of the lockdown was one of the sources of this kind of second wave that we are deep now today. So this is a representation of the population. And this is the, so we reached about 1,200 subjects. The experiment was in a short number of days. We got this kind of 1,100. Obviously, it is not a representative sample of the Lombardy population because it was on voluntary base and it was only online. And so we could only control ex post about the influence of gender, of the influence of the province, of the municipality or residents. We got a lot of controls to try to, estimate certain kind of distortion of our sample. This is the sample distribution in terms of provinces of the Lombardy regions. And so the participants were at a 4 vignettes, which were our experimental manipulation, and they were asked to agree on the set of more stringent norms of control of non-compliance in the population, included increasing fines for non-violators, and making mandatory to download very contested smartphone app to trace contacts, and being keen or support that military and control agency could be used to control territory and control. So there was a different kind of possible measures which were discussed, by the way, at that time as a possibility in case the numbers of infections were returning to increase during this kind of gradual easing of lockdown pressures. And the only difference between subjects were about the condition, about the fact that informations on these kind of requirements of this kind of more stringent non-compliance were suggested by scientific experts, by politicians alone, or by a mix of scientific experts and politicians. So, which also changed the source of information, the source of trust about those kind of norms. The only difference, guys, was 2 words. In this vignette, there was only 2 words, scientific experts. So the people were randomized to say, according to scientific experts, we need to do that. Do you agree on doing that or not? According to politicians, we are supposed to do that. According to scientific expert and politician, we have to do that. So the only difference is this one. So this is the only difference. The rest is completely equal for all these kind of 1,000 subjects. And by the way, and this is the survey experiment, it says that we ask intentions. We measure intention. However, we not only measure intention. After this, we ask them whether they want to have more information about this kind of apps, and they had to click. So they have to decide. So this wasn't a decision, a behavior, not an intention. Second, they knew that the rewards of the experiment was a given probability, participating to a lottery for giving a given probability of having a prize. Shit. Oh yeah. Can you see my screen? Probably not. They were in the same position we were yesterday, we were before. Okay, so guys, this was the only difference between these kind of groups. But we also, as I told you, not only measure intentions, but also real behavior. Real behavior was, as I told you, information seeking, So click on the link and spend time to read further details about the smartphone app, or in any case, information about tracing controls. And secondly, the reward. So they got either a chance to participate to a lottery to get an Amazon voucher of 50 euros, or they could donate to a charity, to a related charity on COVID. And we gave them two options of one more governmental charity, Protezione Civile, and people in Italy know what is that, or a medical foundation, so the Fondazione Sacco, which is a grouping for hospital in Milan, which is on the front line of COVID, but also performing research about COVID. And so they had to decide whether or not to run for a private kind of reward or contributing. So we also measure pro-social behavior in terms of, okay, I give up my probability of getting a voucher of Amazon, and I give a number of euros to this kind of associations. So we got this kind of VigNet was a survey experiment, so measuring intentions. But then after the intention, we got behavioral controls in terms of decisions. And what is your guess? But so do you believe that when measures were recommended only by scientific experts or by politicians or a mix, which is, according to your guess, the information which increased the pro-social motivation of people of donating more and increasing the agreement about the more stringent kind of measures of social control?
For me, the absence of politicians.
Okay, any other?
The same.
Okay, so politicians outside. Okay, no, it's not that. It's not that. In sense that, as you will see, let me see here. Okay, this is something that I already said. No, look here. So we found that whenever only scientific experts were mentioned, people were more cooperative, more keen to donate, and they were even more supportive of stringent kind of social control measures. Whenever this was recommended only by politicians, we did not find any effect, any statistical effect about this. Whenever we found a negative effect on cooperation, whenever measures were proposed by a mix of politicians and scientific experts. And these are cool in a way that one of the, I don't know, maybe for Esteban is different in another country there, but what was the problem here in terms of, especially information on media and so on, is that at some point people, could not perceive the difference between scientists and politicians. Instead, that politicians use the scientists to legitimate their kind of measures. Scientists and experts were appearing in TV and were, speaking like politicians, having public responsibility. So it was a confusion of roles. And I like this kind of result because that's exactly the guess that we got. So the guy was that whenever there's a confusion of role and responsibility in public policy, this creates confusions in individuals. And so, this is our tentative explanation about our results. But results are quite very, very strong in a way. Obviously, this is, for instance, is a kind of a logistic regression of predicting the probability, the decision of participants to donate. And you find here that whenever there's a mix of politicians and scientists, you find, a kind of negative effect on this. And this also on women. So the problem is that as you will see, our sample is unbalanced in terms of women and men. So there's a 70% of women, which tells you how much women are more sensitive to this kind of survey online and are more keen to cooperate with researchers. And our explanation is the men were less involved in our experiments. And our explanation is that because we could not use rewards in a test of the post. And by the way, this has been a discussion in the team involved. And this is something I learned very well. It said very much. It says that whenever you post on Facebook a call for participation in a research, and we use it obviously, and this was a tension between two of our co-authors were in favor and two were against, and I was against, by the way. But at some point, I got it. Is that we used an information like, you know, you were recruiting participants in our lab without offering them information about the rewards, try to not bias them to guess what was the game in very neutral way. This is what you do in the experiments in the lab in the students. And I learned that this is not probably good in whenever you run or recruit students in a social media. You need to speak, use the contextual information that people are used to receive on Facebook. And this is why my understanding men were less reactive, because we did not mention rewards. We didn't mention any kind of motivations we were very neutral. And women were more keen to cooperate independently, probably for the topic for the subject, whereas men probably should, in my understanding, men which are typically more sensitive to rewards, and this is quite a very consistent results in behavior. Whenever we could mention about the probability of winning a lottery in Amazon, probably we should have increased the participation of men, but we decided not to do that. And this is why we got this kind of imbalance between. But anyway, whenever we control for the gender propensity, or in terms of endorsing norms or cooperating or donating, we didn't find any difference in terms of gender. So you can control ex post, obviously, but typically this is not a sample of the population, obviously. And this is, for instance, is the age distribution. This is, we also profile, obviously, political kind of positions, familiarity with COVID among parents and friends. And we found, for instance, that typically the average sample age of the population is 44. And the typically population were dominated by women, and a little bit on the left spectrum of the political kind of position. And extremely highly educated, if I remember well, 56% of these 1,200 residents in Lombardy got a university degree. So it was definitely not a representative sample of the population. However, you know very well, we were not aiming about any kind of generalizability or representative of the population. We were aiming and comparing groups in kind of treatments. And so whenever you find a statistical, robust kind of effect, whenever you randomize groups and you got this kind of groups across the tree, you might claim that you find something, even if this is not generalizable across a representative sample. And in the end of the day, obviously, representative sample population is always better, is the golden standard. But if we were making to have a randomized sample of the population to involve in these experiments, the experiment would have costed 10 times what it costed in our case. It costed like 2,000 euros. We had to keep open, probably. We had to probably wait for, I don't know how much time, to understand if there was a company selling us a representative sample online. So pros and cons, you know, guys, this is the idea. This is the distribution of the demographic variables across treatments. And you can see also the perception of the treat of the COVID, the age, the political preferences, the poor proportion in the sampling of female cases of COVID in the family, political preferences, and the percentage of high education. And you obviously, whenever you run this kind of online experiments in the making, in which obviously the most important thing is to run the experiments in the right time, or even if you don't have a representative sample of the population, but you are we were just exactly were intended to capture a transition period between lockdown measures and gradual easing to understand how much people will be keen to increase social control for reducing the probability of the infection, of the increase of the infection. So what is valuable is the timing, is the cost, and obviously the lucky to find a very nice statistical effect. So this is an example, and I like that. You know, I've learned, by the way, this is my first online experience in the making. So, and I would love to do those more in the future in terms of behavior. So it seems to be a very nice kind of contribution that our Behavior Lab, our behavioral group in Milan could offer to the public debate. Obviously, the dramatic side of this question is that it took months to have, obviously, referee reports back. So we're still stuck in the second round, and hopefully we'll publish maybe by the end of the year or beginning of the next year. So the problem is also about the delay in publication. But anyway, so we are lucky, well, bad to tell, but lucky that there's a second wave. So, and then now we are in the same position of the main sense that there will be at some point now we are under lockdown, we back to the more stringent kind of lockdown measures, and then we will gradually easing this kind of lockdown, and we will probably turn to more stringent norms depending on the dynamic of the pandemic. In May, it was probably hard to predict 100% that there would be a second wave in the September, October, but the fact that there is still probably makes this kind of results valid or interesting also in this kind of current kind of situation. Any question? Okay, so this is an example of online experiment. Again, you lose a little bit of the control about the sample, and however you gain in terms of having a timely kind of experiment out on an issue which is under debate in the society. Still, this kind of, the only things that I learned is that again, I was writing, suggesting probably this, that whenever, it's very important that recruitment is coherent, so that you use recruitment platforms and you use messages and information which are coherent with the kind of audience that you are speaking. And this is something that we did not do it when we use this kind of very neutral information on Facebook instead of a more friendly and engaging kind of experience. I've learned that, and this is something also Matthews Organic speak a lot about this, in the sense that whenever you are in the lab, again, it's like inviting someone for dinner. You are preparing everything, you prepare the table, you select your menu, and you select your wine and right kind of music. And so people are coming at home and you have everything under control. It's like when students come to your lab. You can prepare everything, you know? And you also can invite or not invite certain people. So you also select to send out invitation. Okay. But whenever you go online, it's the opposite, it's the other way around. So you are, you know, knocking on the door of a person on his or her smartphone or computer. So you are going there, you know, and this is completely different kind of things. It has to be managed and handled and designed and completely different. You have to be, you have to engage people. You have to knock at the door and they have to say, please welcome. So you need to engage participants. Otherwise, participants will not come, or will come but will not like this experiment. And this is and you will have to speak the way they speak. It's the audience is more important than the experimenter, whereas the experimenter is more important than the audience in the lab. So again, or whenever you go to the field, you have to adapt. We got, for instance, when we replicate, we got this kind of experiments in this kind of mall in Brescia. We spent a lot of time with this kind of the property of this mall to present our kind of request and to understand how to design our small kind of virtual lab, mobile lab in the commercial center. We got to define the strategy about our assistance to recruit people around the mall. We got informations about typically which was the slot of the day during the week in which we could, you know, have a sample which was a little bit more representative. We learned, for instance, that in certain kind of slot of days, typically what you find around are very highly educated, very rich kind of people, because they go to the commercial mall in specific kind of days. So these guys from the commercial mall share their data about the flux of customers on socioeconomic variables throughout the week. So we designed our presence in the commercial mall intended exactly to avoid that we're only, you know, picking up a sample of highly educated persons. So typically, for instance, if we knew that on Saturday afternoon is a typical slot in that kind of commercial setting in which there was families, and so quite kind of, probably very good to be there during the kind of Saturday afternoon. So, and we learned, for instance, that from 5 to 7, 5 to 8 during the week is typical where high rich people go to the to pick up food or this kind of stuff. So again, we got to draft, to understand the context before doing that. And to speak about context, to speak about field experiment, this is my favorite example. And a very nice kind of work about, this is a field experiment, studying the crowding out effect of adding institutions or regulating a given kind of context. Is a field experiment of parents being late picking up their children in 10 private daycare centers in Israel, run by this kind of two guys, Gnisi and Rustikin, and published in the Journal of Legal Studies in 2000. So it's 20 years ago. But this has been a fundamental kind of inspirations. What do they do? So what they do is that they got agreement with 10 private daycare centers in the city in Israel, and more or less accepting a similar kind of number of children from families. And they measure in this kind of daycare centers, every day for a given number of weeks, they measure the delay in terms of minutes of time of parents picking up their children from the center. So we know very well that this is never a part of the agreement. You don't have, do you have any one of you having children? Not yet, I assume. Okay, I have two daughters. And whenever you sign a contract with a daycare center, it is not specified typically what happens if parents are late. It's a kind of, this is called an incomplete contract. So it includes that you pay for having your child cared for, for instance, from 8 to 5 in the afternoon. So you're assumed to show up at 5 to pick up your kid. But obviously, what is the problem about that is that obviously no one can leave your kid in the street. And so, I mean, again, this is a very gender distortion. Typically, this kind of workers of this kind of day center are women. And so these professionals obviously would love to be free from your beast shouting and destroying the quality of life for all the day, but they can't just put and kick the ass of your kid and say, go out and wait your mom or your father in the street. They are, they keep this kind of kid until the parents show up. And what is the point about the parents showing up to picking up late their children from this kind of center? Is this sense of guilt, shame. You typically mask your face with this kind of, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm late. It was busy, I'm sorry. This will be the last time, I'm very sorry. It's like, I know that so it's a sense of guilt, and so there's a social norm, an endogenous social norm, which is based on typically these kind of things about it's bad to exploit these professionals and exploit the fact that they can't leave your kid in the street. It's very bad because these kind of professionals also have to have a private life at 5 o'clock go and having their kind of life. It's not good. It's not polite. It's not respectful of these kind of persons to exploit them and arriving late. Who are you to getting late to pick up your kids? You are more important than me. So your appointments are more important than mine. So typically it's a sense of guilt and shame that keeps this kind of delay at a physiological level, And so in a group of daycare center, at some point they add a fine for late pickups. So they announce the same fine in all this kind of testing group of daycare center, in that they announced that from a given day, a fine was introduced for late parents. And this fine was, proportional to the cost of the working hour of professional waiting for that. It was, I don't remember, obviously, Obviously, I don't remember. Sorry, it was something like $20. I don't remember that. Obviously, it was not $1 million, obviously. It was reasonable. Otherwise, if you make a fine which is disproportional, you might generate a reaction about people declining this kind of, or breaking down the contract because the daycare center is managed by a crazy guy fining $1 million for 1 hour of delay. So the fine was reasonable, you know, which is a very nice topic about the fact that there's all these constraints about the magnitude of fines and rewards that we might use in real cases, also not real cases. And so they were measuring, the average, you know, delay of parents under this condition. And they continue to measure the delay if in a control group in which there was no fine at all introduced. And for a given number of weeks, and if you already know the study, please don't respond. What is your guess about, do you expect that adding a fine to late parents had decreased the delay or increased the delay or make any difference? If you know the study, please be fair and not respond. Any guess? Okay, if you look at this picture, the answer is already there, so that's not problematic. In any case, so the delays increased. The delays increased and increased not only you see here, this is a very nice things about that. This is the increase in here. You see the increase in late arrivals on the parents' population in those kind of daycare center. You see here the standard deviation. So it's not only that parents were systematically more late in picking up their kids, but it was incredible. So there was people really, really late. So also the standard deviation in terms of average delay was impressively long. See here, so these are the standard deviation of these kind of late pickups. And obviously the explanations about, and by the way, then this kind of fine was removed. And whenever they announced the removal of this kind of fine, it took weeks and weeks to come back to the original level of delay pre or the introduction of the fine. It took a given number of weeks to go back to the normal kind of or physiological delay. So what was the question here? There was a pre-existing social norm in this kind of context. The teacher is just a nice and generous person. You should not take advantage of her patient. And which was accompanied, by the way, by an emotional correlate, which was shame. So this kind of norms was evident in the face of people, of late people, showing shame in their face against this kind of teachers. You know very well that any social norm has an emotional correlate. This is a fantastic thing. That's also why whenever studying social norm, we can't, disregard the role of emotion, because emotions are social. Shame is a phase which completely changed. Okay? Sense of guilt is your face becoming red. It's fantastic. This is the emotional correlate in social norms. Social norms have always an emotional correlate. And that's also why the Behavior Lab will be equipped with software to trace emotions. And we invested on this kind of things on the Behavior Lab, convinced about the fact that social emotions have to be studied more in this kind of experimental research. And these kind of social norms, pre-existing, endogenous, no one has decided this. It was an endogenous kind of social norm equilibrium, was completing an incomplete contract. So the contracts were incomplete. Yes, they did not formalize what happens to parents getting late. The social norms was completing an incomplete contract, and in any case, keeping this kind of effect of delayed at the minimal level, and self-regulating in a way. Whenever they add a fine, they completely change. They complete the contract, by the way. So the contract now is complete. Yes, it also includes a fine in case you're late. The contract is complete. However, you transform a pre-existing social norm and a concept like being late into a commodity. If I can pay for my delay, what the fuck? I can pay for my delay. I can take it easy and I come back after 1 hour or 2 hours. And I also entered this kind of trade without that shame in my face, but with a smile. I arrived. Where is my kid? So, and also, by the way, to say the emotional correlate also in the sense now, finally, after spending weeks in which I'll show up with this kind of shame in my face, now finally I can pay and I can show up with a smile without any sense of shame. Oh, fantastic. So, but what else is that the social norms was crowding out. The motivation which induced people, parents not to be late, were completely removed. And so the system ended up in a completely different, so the prediction was to reduce and delays increased. And by the way, before social norms getting back into the picture, weeks of time paid by the teacher and with effort by parents to be less late than what they wanted. And at some point, the equilibrium took weeks to be restored. So this is called crowding out. What is crowding out? Because it's defined the introduction of a formal institution and the completeness of this kind of contract as a formal institution crowded out the motivation of people in keeping under control their delay. So sometimes institutions and social norms do not substitute each other, do not complement each other, but they erode each other. And this is a fantastic case about this kind of crowding out effect or formal institutional pre-existing social norm equilibrium. And this is why I began. So this is a very nice field experiment and one of the most funny, by the way, to tell students. And it's very kind of effective in a way. So this is, for instance, one of the sources of very important kind of research in the future is about not only in my understanding, my opinion, the emotional correlates, social norms, but also the interplay, the substitute effect or the crowding out effect between formal institutions and social norms, because we know very well that at some point they have to coexist, and the fact that they coexist with good equilibrium, with desirable kind of outcome is important to understand, And so, okay, so let's, end up with the last kind of discussion. So we're perfectly in time and just share with you about my experience about why I believe that behavioral sociological research is beautiful. What is the beauty of this kind of thing? So first of all, experiments are very cool because you generate your own data. You don't depend from anyone. So for instance, think about COVID. So data collection in the field will be is affected. You might run online experiments and collect your data. So that's very important. Sometimes sociologists are depending from external sources, official surveys, data, and so this creates a lot of dependency. Experiments are very good because our data generation mechanism. Second point, and by the way, with the online kind of version, this is so the online experiments have reduced the obstacles and the cost of running experiments. And so this is something that probably should be done more in the future. And by the way, now we can't do only online experiments because labs are closed. And secondly, experimental design can be easily replicated. So anyone can take up one of my experiments and replicate it exactly how I did in his or her own lab or his own kind of context. And obviously this improves theory falsification. This improved the possibility that by rerunning the same experimental design, others verifies that maybe you were wrong, or maybe your established causal relationship did not resist to variation or more or did or context. And so this increased our confidence about the fact that any kind of theoretical kind of conclusions should be supported by. And by the way, theory falsification means that any kind of experimental results are falsifiable. Anyone can repeat it and falsify the finding. So this is, Karl Popper's idea is one of the most important elements of distinguishing scientific knowledge from non-scientific knowledge, good knowledge with bad knowledge. And secondly, it favors finding cumulativeness. Again, Squazzoni made this kind of experiment. We replicated a little bit like variant, results are the same. So you learn collectively about, you develop knowledge together with others. Anyone can replicate your experiments, whereas this is very difficult for qualitative research, for instance. It's very difficult to be replicated by others, and so it's not cumulative. It's easy to integrate experiments of behavioral research with agent-based model for exactly what generalizing after the sample, largest sample. I will give you an example during the behavioral game theory about counterfactual analysis via agent-based modeling, in which typically you replicate the experiment in your computer, in your model, and you change what will have happened if this data will be different. And this obviously is a counterfactual analysis which also corroborates even more your experimental finding. I will give examples of one paper in which we use experimental data to calibrate agent behavior, and we modify certain kind of conditions which were either impossible or extremely costly to test in the lab, and we observe if the aggregate outcomes were robust against the variation of this kind of condition. This is something that you can do also in the lab sometimes. You can rerun the experiment with another population, changing a little bit of detail, and then compare with previous results. But one, this is extremely costly. Second, sometimes you can't manipulate a certain kind of factor. I give an example, complex interaction structure. You can't really have, it's very difficult to reach the scale, especially in the lab, of observation of same number of individuals acting at the same time to explore complex interaction structure. Whereas in the model it's very easy. Secondly, scenario analysis. Typically humans, either online or in the lab, decide for a given number of rounds. You can't ask human subjects to decide for 20 days. And there's a cycle of attention. Sometimes the task is extremely cognitively demanding. And so you observe only probably a fraction of this kind of possibility of observation. Well, with models, you can reduce the kind of sample bias in a way that you can start from what you observed in a given number of rounds of decision, and you can scale up to scenario analysis in which you multiply the number of interaction, you expand the size of the interaction scale. This is a very kind of things. Another lesson, so the online world makes it possible to run experiments in the making. So this is a very fantastic thing, guys. And it says that now we can really, and the pandemic has, indicated the added value of this. We might run online experiments exactly to respond to a challenge or to an issue which is very valuable in our society. And so this also increases the interest of our research for policymakers or for the public in general. And unless that you are not stuck in peer review journals. Another things, in my understanding, experiments and modeling are the only serious alternative to big data research. So you know very well that big data is transforming also social research. And people are looking for data. People are believing about that you only have to look at data and everything is there. It's just a matter of the quality and the size of your data and the models that you use to, estimate your data. It's an era of machine learning. It's an era of advanced econometrics applied to big data sets. And it's an era for inductive kind of research. And experiments and modeling are still old school because it's a kind of deductive. So we need to develop hypotheses before designing an experiment. So it's a way of valuing theory against inductive reasoning. And I do believe that this is still a serious kind of things. And online is probably the way to reach a scale which is very good to provide an alternative to this kind of convergence towards big data social research, which is probably something that is going on even more in the future. Finally, what I believe is that as sociologists, we also must find a way to try to use this kind of experimental methods, probably also differently than what behavioralists or especially economists are doing. Instead of focusing on individual behavior, we focus on aggregate properties. And this is a fantastic example of Squazzoni is this one. So an experiment that looks at certain properties of those kind of markets, like instability and unpredictability. So this idea, so it's not just focusing on individual decisions, it's just to start from this, to try to guess or understand and estimate aggregate properties. We have to go probably behind randomized trial control procedures. So we will talk about randomized trial control in the game theory, behavior game theory lecture. So the idea that we have to purge the context and just concentrate in isolating factors and just concentrating on manipulation of randomized groups. We may also be a little bit more provocative and going and adding context, pushing experiments close to context-specific observation and far away from randomized trial controls, for instance. We might be more brave in exploring interaction between humans and non-humans. So in the lab, what typically people do is using computer networks to mediating as a platform for studying direct or indirect interaction between subjects in the lab. There's examples in which subjects in the lab do not interact with each other, but interact with artificial agents. And this creates a lot of opportunities, a lot of more creative kind of application because you also keep under control the non-humans can be designed. And so you must stress and have impact humans on pre-existing, pre-designed kind of non-humans behavior. And this expands. So, I mean, obviously, whenever humans are interacting with humans, they are interacting, typically what happens is a human behavior, you know? And what can we learn when humans are interacting with non-humans is that we might push certain kind of behavior from non-humans in which typically probably humans are not exhibiting. And so this expands a little bit our possibility to understand human reaction to this kind of condition. And finally, we need to study more emotion, but this I already told you. We need to integrate experiments and modeling, I already told you. One other thing is that economists typically go in the lab to purge everything, no? So they assume randomly shuffled couples. They want to purge everything and concentrate, like in a randomized trial control idea, concentrate on very tiny signal. So they want to concentrate on tiny signal and say that, okay, I excluded a lot, but for this kind of tiny signal, I can be confident that this is the established causal relation with this kind of tiny signal. Let's do the other way around. Instead of concentrating a tiny signal, let's use the lab as a virtual artificial reality. And with augmented reality and understanding, because with virtual artificial reality is the other way around. Instead of concentrating a small signal, you are embedding subject into a society. Sociologists, in my understanding, and this is, I tell this to myself first and tell it to you, that we need to be more explorative in the way we use experimental methods. Whereas, fortunately, also myself, in most of the case, I've been very close to experimental economics. The only things that I made it was to obviously to complement experiments with agent-based modeling, which is very good, and I will continue to do that. But the things that I never did, which I would like to do, and I see value on doing this, is exploring more, using lab as a part of the observational methods. Why we have to have randomized trial control and concentrate on small manipulations of both signals? Why not also doing other way around? So to use experiments as a lab, as a virtual reality in which you observe the embeddedness of individuals in virtual reality, and we manipulate artificial and non-artificial agents. And maybe we can learn a lot that probably economists or behavioralists are not considering. And in division of labor and also defending the position of sociologists doing this, I would believe that a little bit of this kind of exploration could be very, very, very worth considering. Okay, guys, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm here to respond to any question. Okay, it's at 12, so this is a very bad practice to end up all that in that way. Okay, guys, a lot of questions now. But anyway, I will be very happy to stay here for asking your questions in case you do have. Any question? We'll learn more during the, but please.
I was wondering, what do you mean by virtual artificial reality? So I mean, hypothetical example.
Well, hypothetical example, that's our groups, by the way, is not new. So in the sense that the lab, that individuals in the lab are equipped with virtual tools for virtual reality, and they interact, they move in the space, they enter in the space by being, embedded into very kind of virtual social reality. Obviously, this requires a lot of technologies, but a lot of investment, but this could be a possibility. So one of the problems is obviously the problem of embeddedness in a way that's, again, so in what we observe, it's always a gain. You gain something and you lose something. That's the thing that it's obviously there. Whenever you enrich the use of the lab in terms of studying the embeddedness of individuals in a given social reality, using technologies to embed people in a social reality, you are losing obviously this kind of the possibility to establish tiny signal and be sure that, okay, in this kind of confidence, in this kind of zone, I can establish this. And you probably end up in putting, so that what is called the kitchen sink, the kitchen temptation to, the soup, to put together the big vegetables, these kind of things. The kitchen sink temptation, like this kitchen sink temptation to put everything there, and then you can't even, whenever you put everything in the soup, it's very difficult to distinguish what you like or not. And obviously, it's the other way around. There's a lot of, probably disadvantages in doing this, but I do believe that considering that the experimental method is not extremely mainstream in our community, we are totally entitled to be more provocative and explorative in this kind of enterprise. And I do believe that at some point, if you will use lab and behavioral research more creatively, people, also our colleagues who are not fan of our type of research, will start to say, okay, guys, these kind of guys have included a lot of kind of context stuff in this kind of, not just concentrating on the tiny signal. But it's just an example. I mean, I know that someone has already invested in this kind of virtual reality lab. It's just an example about pushing the experiments out of the randomized trial control mantra and more close to observe, to create well-controlled observations. Still there are value, because in the social reality, we don't have well-controlled observation, Even behind big data, very well, there's a lot of bias, and so you can use this data as data, but the mechanisms producing those data have a lot of effect on this kind of data. So I mean, there's no example of well-controlled observation outside in a society. In the lab, you have to. There's opportunities to do that. But the spectrum between the randomized trial control, concentrating on tiny signal, and the virtual reality has to be explored. And this is something that probably you guys, especially of your generation, is called to do.
So I was just to conclude. So maybe these artificial realities could be also something like, which maybe is less intensive to make with the virtual realities, like video games.
Yeah, games. I mean, there's a lot of simulation games are used, for instance, as contextualizing. It's a challenge. You enter in the lab, you have in your computer a game or a simulation game, and you decide it in a kind of simulated context. It's people are using. So we need to use more also in simulation games are used in business, obviously, as part of the scenario analysis or decision making in business organization. We need to do something more also in general in our kind of research about social behavior. Yeah, good example, Francesco. Anyone else? Okay, so there's no questions. I'd like to thank you, and I'm just